Listen, Bill Richardson is going to speak. We're going to do something really fun and interesting. Robert Borosage, who's the head of Campaign for America's Future, is going to listen to the speech with us, and we'll comment as we go along, see how he does. Here's Bill Richardson speaking at Invesco Field.
Says, you're all here to follow a celebrity. It's time someone told him you're here to elect a president.
I don't think he should even address the celebrity line.
Very defensive.
Is the first candidate in history who thinks he can win by telling voters they're not thinking for themselves. Well, John McCain voted with George Bush 95% of the time. Was that thinking for himself? He voted twice against the Bush tax cuts. Now he supports them. Is that thinking for himself?
That's why he brought the celebrity line, because he wanted to set this up.
Of big tobacco,
clearly this is going to be the defining speech against McCain.
Yep.
Then embraced it. He shunned the NRA and then asked for their help in this election. Is that thinking for himself?
It's a great contrast with 4 years ago.
Yeah.
For change. But John McCain has only changed his mind on taxes, on immigration, on global warming, even on torture.
McCain used that line against Romney. Now they're using it against McCain. It's a great idea by Richardson.
McCain may pay hundreds of dollars for his shoes, but we're the ones who will pay for his flip-flops.
Oh, nice singer.
That'll rouse the crowd.
And that'll get in the papers, too. Nicely done by Richardson.
In my lifetime of diplomacy and governing, our country has never faced as many difficult challenges as we do today. A sinking economy, 2 wars, an energy crisis, and a presidency that has only grown more arrogant as history closes in with its verdict of failure. America faces a simple choice. Do we want more of the same, or is it time to change America, what America needs? Barack Obama.
I do think that not doing the philosophical differences, that allowing yourself simply to be defined thus far in this convention as change that we need, which is not defined, has been a mistake.
That's interesting. I want to talk to you about that after the speech. That's a really interesting point.
We can finally become free of foreign oil and stop global warming with more renewable energy, solar, wind, more domestic energy, hybrid cars, investments in energy assistance. That's the change America needs.
He got a little specific there.
Would keep us
it's not
in
just
Iraq.
programs, it's philosophy, it's direction.
That's interesting, yeah.
It's time for that to end. It's time to bring our troops home from Iraq responsibly. It's time to force the Iraqi politicians to use the $80 billion in oil money to rebuild their economy. And instead of spending $10 billion a month in Iraq, invest here at home in jobs, schools, healthcare, and take care of our veterans.
It's interesting. The stadium forces every speaker to yell, so it changes the tenor of the speech a little bit.
John McCain called our recession psychological. His economic advisors say American families are whiners. But when the oil companies whine, John McCain says they need more tax breaks. Barack Obama says it's time for that to end.
This is pretty hard hitting.
Yeah, he's good on attack. It's just defining the positive direction in contrast isn't quite there. It's done in programs, but it's not done philosophically.
To depress real wages and sacrifice our workers. It's time to put American workers first and rebuild a middle class with the president who supports unions and the rights of workers to organize.
Well, you gotta like that, Bob.
That's the change America needs. I have a question for you. Is anybody here going to miss Dick Cheney?
Another good one.
Joe Biden is going to be truly a great vice president of the United States. Barack Obama and Joe Biden believe we must fight the terrorists, not where we imagine them to be, but where we know them to be, like Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Strong on foreign policy, too.
A global effort to secure loose nuclear materials, not where we imagine them to be, but where we know them to be, like in Russia. And finally, we need a president who in his first day in office says this: I will follow and uphold and respect the Constitution of the United States, and then actually does it.
Yeah, strong speech. It's coming out guns blazing on all fronts. I like what he said about foreign policy a lot, too, because they don't usually attack the Republicans enough on that category.
I agree, totally.
Stop spying on Americans.
Hey.
And protects a woman's right to choose.
I think that might be the first time I've heard that in this convention.
Women's right to choose?
Yeah, in the major speeches.
Wow.
Bill of Rights, who shuts down Guantanamo and stops torture We must do all of this not because these are American ideals, but because we know they are. Y vamos a tener un presidente que le pone atención a Latinoamérica
he missed that one.
y a México.
Because we think they are ideals, because we know they are. He just
Right.
puts the emphasis.
Dave, what did he say there?
My fellow citizens,
All right, we'll get a translation later.
John McCain served this country in war. We honor his service, but that doesn't mean we have to make him president. At a time when America needs change and not more of the same, America needs Barack Obama. I have a question for America and my fellow delegates. Are you ready to take our country back? Are we going to win this election for America's future? Let's do it.
Good speech, strong speech.
Yeah, very strong speech by Richardson. As I'm going to make a random point to start with, as I hear these speeches, it is remarkable that the Democrats chose a guy named Barack Obama to run.
Well, we're asking a lot of the American people.
We really are.
When you hear the chants, Obama will do this, Obama, and you think people listening to the name Obama alone is asking a lot of the American people.
And I was thinking that today. Oh, I wanted to mention it earlier, but if his name was Frank Johnson,
it would make a difference.
I think it would make an enormous difference. I think it'd be a walkaway at this point. Yeah. I don't think it's the race nearly as much as it is the name, because the name makes him sound more foreign, more different.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you really, I think you have to give the Democratic voters a lot of credit for getting beyond that.
No, it's a stunning act of audacity, really, that Democrats chose him and understood the real talent that he has and got inspired by it and allowed themselves to overcome. And now we're going to ask that of the American people in 60-some days. It's a big, heavy lifting task. It's possible. Clearly, they've done it, but it's asking a lot.
It is, and I'm not sure I got a full sense during the primaries of how difficult it would be. As I see the Republicans attack after attack, and how many people, when interviewed on TV, goes, I don't know,
who is this guy?
Yeah,
where's he from?
Yeah, and do they know any politician? Is it like, do they know Joe Biden's story? I think less than 1% of the country actually knows Joe Biden's story. Right. But why is Joe Biden okay, but they don't know Barack Obama? Because one guy's named Joe Biden and the other guy's named Barack Obama.
Plus, he's been around a long time, and
he has, but
Obama hasn't.
but only the pundits know him.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like the guy sitting in the middle of Arkansas knows Joe Biden's record because he was around for 35 years.
Right, no question.
Yeah, so now let's talk about Richardson's speech there. And by the way, Robert Borosage, the head of Campaign for America's Future, has joined us. I'm really glad you did. That was terrific. And it was an interesting perspective we got from you there. You were saying that they are talking about change in general rather than specific philosophy. Fill that out for us. What do you mean by that?
You saw it a little bit in Clinton's speech last night. He started doing the philosophical choice, right? We've had Republicans with a very extreme philosophy on the economy and on foreign policy that they've been espousing for years. And over the last 8 years, they got the keys to the car and they drove it into a ditch. And that philosophy was, in the economy, we're going to give the tax cuts at the top, we're going to give the power to the CEOs, and we're going to let everything trickle down and we'll all benefit. And it's been proven to be wrong. And so you're for empowering workers, not to just because you want to serve the unions. You're for empowering workers at the workplace because it's the only way we get them a fair distribution of the prosperity that gets generated, so that we create and sustain a middle class society.
Now that you frame it that way, Robert, you're exactly right, because I hadn't thought of it in that frame. But Clinton was a rare guy who took on their philosophy.
Right.
Look, they did this. And they didn't fail because they were bad at it. They didn't fail because they were incompetent. They failed because they did accomplish their mission.
Right. I always say, it's not that they were corrupt, although corruption abounded, right? It wasn't that they were incompetent, although incompetence was pervasive. It was their ideas that failed. And they passed them, we tried them, and they failed.
You're right. Other than Clinton, that has not been brought up very much. Given that, why? Why don't the Democrats want to do a frontal assault on the Republican philosophy?
Well, I think for a long time, a lot of these sitting politicians have been tacking to the wind and kind of sailing in those currents, and so it feels alien to them to do it. Clinton always ran as a populist, so it was pretty easy for him, even though he didn't govern that way. I think for Obama, when people say they don't know what his substance is about, it's not because he doesn't have a whole set of programs out there that are detailed on his website, much more than McCain. It's that he has spent much of this campaign since he got the nomination trying to make Americans comfortable with him, going to Europe, showing that he could be a leadership role in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. And this has become a referendum on Obama, with Republicans attacking him and him trying to make them Americans comfortable. He's got to define substance by showing this big contrast with McCain philosophically, a big choice of direction. We win this election if it's a choice of direction. We may lose it if it's a referendum on Barack Obama.
Do you think he's going to do it, given that he doesn't have some of the baggage that the longtime Democrats in Washington do? You're right. They've been, giving in to the Republicans for so long that they can't make the argument anymore because they voted with him. But Obama doesn't have some of that baggage. And maybe the Democratic voters were smart in going with a person who doesn't have that kind of baggage.
I think he could do it, and I think if you look at the elements of what he says, it's there. He doesn't have to reinvent himself to do it. So he's got the whole notion of change from the bottom up. We've got to mobilize to get the big interests out of the way so we can make these changes. He's got the elements of an agenda that's about empowering people and using government for common purpose rather than tearing it down for special interests. He's just got to lay it out.
If you could vocalize the Democratic philosophy, whether that's the philosophy that currently exists is a different question, but the one that should exist, the progressive philosophy that we would want the Democrats to have, what would you have them focus on? If you were making that part of the speech tonight for Obama, what would you have him say?
We believe that America, as Clinton said last night, abroad is best known by its example, not by the example of its force. By the force of its example, not by. So we start by making America strong from the inside out, and the way to do that is to empower people, working people and middle class people at the workplace, in the voting booth, get the special interests out of the way, and make this government work for working people, not just for the very few. And over the last 8 years, we've seen a government that's done just the reverse, right? It's put the special interests literally in the room for our energy policy, for example. It's cut the taxes on the top. It's given them what they wanted, and they've created the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. They've created the first time where we've had a recovery with growth, with profits up, with CEO salaries soaring, and wages stagnant or declining.
Robert, this is one of my focuses recently, and I don't know if I'm wrong politically, but I feel that one of the problems that the Democrats have is they don't connect the Republicans to the legislation to the results enough. Look, this stuff didn't happen on its own. The gas prices didn't happen. Because right now the current conventional wisdom is business cycles happen. It isn't the Republicans' fault, and it isn't the Democrats' fault. They don't notice that the cycles seem to coincide with Democratic and Republican presidents. And as far as how it affects the middle class, not necessarily overall GDP, but how it affects the middle class versus the rich, and say, look, here is what the Republicans actually did. They got this law passed, and that is why you pay more at the pump, or et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. And, this very fundamental difference about the economy. McCain says the fundamentals of the economy are strong, as does Bush, and they believe it. They believe they just had 8 years of growth. It was a great economy. Low unemployment, low inflation, lots of growth, profits up. What are you guys whining about, as Phil Gramm said? Well, what we're whining about is that, less than 1% of Americans captured most of that growth as income, and the rest of us were stuck with wages that didn't keep up with costs. They don't get it. They don't see it. We've got to describe that to people very graphically so they understand that difference.
Do we have enough time? I mean, there's about 70 days left.
Sure, absolutely there's enough time. People feel it. They just want to make sure that where the Democrats are, where Obama is, particularly because they don't know him, what side are you on? Do you get it?
Right.
Can we trust you we don't expect you to be a messiah and solve this damn thing, but we want you to fight for us.
Right.
And we want you to understand what's going on. You got to prove that to us.
Finally, going back to Richardson's speech, two quick fronts there: Constitution and foreign policy. You don't see a lot of Democrats outlining. Sometimes they will mention the Constitution. We're going to bring back the Constitution. But they just kind of assume that everybody knows what they're talking about, and then they leave it be. But here, Richardson was more specific and said, look, this is what I mean by the Constitution. We're not going to torture people anymore. And a woman's right to choose, etc. I thought that was great. A, what did you think of it? B, do you think there's any chance that people will pick up on that trend and that'll get injected?
That's talking to the liberals of the Democratic Party care about that, and the more educated lawyer class or whatever. But I think most of what's been surprising about the reaction to the war on terror was how much Americans pushed back as the repressive reaction started to grow from the administration. And I thought Obama made a mistake when he flip-flopped on FISA. A mistake politically, not just a mistake on substance.
I couldn't agree more. See, here's the thing. They didn't have to frame it in a lawyerly way. I get that I'm more concerned about rights than maybe the average guy trying to make a living, etc. And that might sound condescending in some way, but it's true. Because I'm a lawyer, and I went to law school, and I care deeply about the Constitution, and this is my job. It's not his job, the plumber in Arkansas. It's my job, right? I get that. But I think that the Democrats could have won that politically if they said, that's not about that. It's about America. These guys are being unpatriotic. They don't believe in the American system. They think that we have to go to the Syrian system of torture instead of going with the American system.
I think that's exactly right.
And they just didn't have the courage to make that argument.
And it doesn't pull well in the beginning. You gotta make the argument. I think if you make the argument, you win it with the American people.
I think so too. But I was glad to see Richardson begin that argument at least tonight.
Yeah,
let's hope other people pick up on it. Finally, on foreign policy, he did what Kerry did a little bit last night, which they almost never do, which is to say, hey, we're not just defending ourselves, saying, hey, we're just as patriotic or we're just as good on foreign policy. No, you don't get it. They're bad at foreign policy.
Right. They've left us weaker, and they've left us more isolated. And there's no question they've squandered $1 trillion in the war in Iraq. And they ought to pay a price for that politically, but you got to argue that case. And Democrats ought to be much more assertive in the wake of Bush. I mean, people see it around the country and around the world. They see it.
And the last thing you mentioned there, Robert, is one that they do seem to be picking up a theme. It's this anger that they wasted our money. And God, we could have used it. And everybody knows Iraq was a fool's errand.
And $10 billion a month to this day.
One thing they should focus on, they should bring it back a little bit, is something we used to talk about a lot on the show many years ago. And we talked about it a lot in the 2004 election. When they first started this war, Andrew Natsios came in front of Congress as an example and said they forced him to say, how much do you think it'll cost? And he gave the number $1.7 billion. Now, if you were...
They fired Lawrence Lindsay when he said $200 billion, right?
That's right. Now, if you were at your job and you goofed by not a factor of 100, but nearly a factor of 1,000.
Right.
If you said your Christmas party was going to cost $1,000, instead it cost $1 million, who wouldn't fire you?
Everybody would fire you. Exactly.
Right. And we're the bosses. It's our money.
Yep.
And so, but I don't, I don't see them picking up on that. I don't know why, but
One thing off the foreign policy theme that drives me nuts about Democrats and McCain, John McCain's health care plan will tax your health care benefits. If you get health care from your employer, he will remove the exemption of that from your income. If you have a family plan from your employer and you're a middle-class, working-class guy, you got a $2,000 or $3,000 tax increase coming because that's a $12,000 tax, a health care plan. 90% of voters have some kind of health care from their employer. John McCain's going to tax it, and you have not heard that once in this convention.
that's true, Robert. But he would just to let me throw out his argument. He would say, "But that's why I'm giving you a tax cut."
Yeah, if you give up your employer-based health care and
Right.
go into the private market and negotiate one-on-one with the insurance companies, he'll give you a tax credit. Lots of luck.
Yeah, and then of course that removes the power of us all working together, as Deval Patrick said a couple of nights ago. And gee, I wonder who that would help.
But it starts
Could it
with
be the
tax-
insurance
It
companies?
starts with taxing your health care benefits because he wants to unravel employer-based health care.
There you go, Robert Borosage from Campaign for America's Future. Thanks so much for joining us on the Young Turks.